In America's toughest hours, whether during wars, depressions, or lean post-war years, working-class families learned the art of making every meal count. From humble kitchens filled with love and grit, they crafted simple, hearty dishes that nourished not just bodies, but spirits. Today, we celebrate those resilient cooks whose creativity and care kept America fed through its hardest times. Potato soup with nothing but love.
And today on Preppy Kitchen, we're making a hearty and delicious potato soup. So let's get started.
Slide transition. Sepia photograph of a 1930s kitchen, enamel pot steaming on a wood stove, a child perched on a stool with a spoon in hand. The camera slowly zooms into the pot. It smelled like everything would be okay. Just steam and starch and a little bit of salt. But somehow, that simple bowl held more comfort than anything else on earth. Potato soup. Not the creamy, bacon-crusted, cheese-drenched kind you see in diners nowadays. No, we're talking about the original working-class version, the one made with just a few wrinkled potatoes, an onion, a spoonful of lard or butter if you were lucky, and water drawn from the tap or pump. No heavy cream, no chicken stock, no fresh thyme sprigs artfully placed on top. Just essentials, boiled down into something far greater than the sum of its parts. This soup showed up in every era where times turned lean. During the Dust Bowl, you could find it simmering on camp stoves in Oklahoma tent cities. During the Great Depression, it filled bellies in boarding houses and back kitchens from Nebraska to New Jersey. World War II rationing, potato soup again. In mining towns, textile mill villages, and railroad shanties, it was the same humble concoction, warm, simple, and somehow enough. It wasn't just food, it was reassurance in liquid form. It said, we're gonna make it through this, one spoonful at a time. The ingredients list was a matter of circumstance and hope. At its heart, 4 or 5 medium potatoes peeled if you could spare the waste, chopped into uneven cubes. 1 yellow onion, strong enough to bring tears, but sweet enough to mellow once it hit the heat. Water to cover, salt of course, maybe a bay leaf or a pinch of black pepper if the spice tin hadn't run dry. And if the gods were smiling on you, a tablespoon of lard, butter, bacon grease, or even evaporated milk to add just a touch of richness. Now, making it wasn't so much a recipe as it was a ritual. You'd start with the onion, roughly chopped, maybe even shredded by hand if you didn't have a knife sharp enough. Into the bottom of your largest pot it went, with a smear of grease if you had it, sizzling until translucent and a little golden at the edges. Next came the potatoes, poured in with a thunk. They'd hit the hot onion base and absorb all that fragrant memory. Water was added next, just enough to cover maybe a finger's depth above the highest potato chunk. Salt was sprinkled in, carefully measured in pinches, not spoons. Then the lid went on. The soup would simmer for a good 30 to 40 minutes, enough time for the potatoes to break down and the starch to thicken the broth ever so slightly. Sometimes folks would mash a bit of it with a fork to make it creamier. Sometimes they'd leave it chunky. Some added a splash of canned milk at the end, or a dab of margarine. Others didn't. It depended on the pantry and the day. And when it was ladled into chipped bowls, steam curling up like a ghost of plenty, it felt like a miracle. A scoop of comfort with each bite. Maybe you'd have it with a heel of dry bread, maybe not. But either way, you were fed, you were warm, you were home. Zoom in on a bowl, steam rising, spoon resting gently inside. This was potato soup, nothing fancy, just enough. And sometimes that was everything. Chipped beef on toast, SOS.
So today we're gonna make creamed chipped beef on toast, sometimes called SOS, sometimes called shit on a shingle.
Slide transition, black and white photo of a soldier's metal tray with thick gravy ladled over toast. The screen flickers like an old film reel before fading into a post-war kitchen. It was salty, sloppy, and stuck to your ribs. It didn't win any beauty contests, but it won the war against hunger every single time. Officially, it's called cream chipped beef on toast, but ask any veteran and they'll tell you straight, it's SOS. Same old stuff, they'd say, though you and I know what the S usually stood for after a long mess hall line. This dish has military roots going back to the early 20th century, but it became a household staple in the decades that followed. When men returned home from World War II and Korea, they brought the taste with them, not because they loved it necessarily, but because it was familiar, cheap, easy, and filling. Perfect for a working-class America trying to get back on its feet. Served in barracks, boot camps, and battleships, chipped beef was one of those universal military foods. Army cooks could make it in massive batches with just a few ingredients. And when meat was rationed or tight, a jar of dried beef slices was a godsend. Even families back home, who might not have fresh meat for weeks, could stretch one jar of armor-chipped beef into dinner for 6. It wasn't glamorous, but it was there for you every time. The ingredients were few and far between, but every one of them pulled its weight. You'd start with a little butter or bacon grease in a skillet. just enough to melt and coat the pan. Into that, you stirred a heaping tablespoon or two of flour, whisking until it made a pale, bubbling paste. That was your roux. Then came the milk, poured in slow, stirred fast to avoid lumps. This created the white gravy, thick, creamy, and waiting for salt. And the beef? It wasn't steak or roast. It was thin, leathery slices of preserved beef, salty as the sea and red as rust. You'd tear it into shreds with your fingers or slice it into ribbons with a knife, dropping it into the bubbling gravy until the whole pan smelled like a barracks breakfast. Now came the toast. No fancy bread here, just basic white sandwich bread, toasted hard enough to stand up to the onslaught of gravy, sometimes day-old, sometimes straight from the bag. The gravy was ladled on top in generous, goopy spoonfuls, spreading across the toast like a heavy blanket. The edges would stay crisp, but the middle? It turned soft and soaked. A savory pudding of salt, starch, and memory. It was the kind of meal that filled you up on a dime. Some folks sprinkled it with pepper, others added peas or a pinch of nutmeg. Some used evaporated milk when fresh milk ran out. In the 1970s, military wives even clipped versions of it from Good Housekeeping and made it for weeknight dinners. It was plain food, yes, but proudly so. Zoom in, a steaming plate of SOS, the gravy glistening, toast edges peeking out underneath. Overlay a faded photo of a soldier in uniform next to his wife in a modest kitchen. It didn't pretend to be fancy. It didn't have to. It just had to show up, fill your belly, and remind you that even in the leanest times, there's something comforting about hot toast and warm gravy. And it did, over and over again. Cornbread and buttermilk supper.
And today on Preppy Kitchen, we're making some quick and easy, delicious cornbread.
Slide transition. An overhead shot of a chipped porcelain bowl with crumbled cornbread and a splash of white buttermilk. A spoon rests nearby. The camera slowly zooms out to reveal a modest wooden table and faded gingham cloth. Sometimes, supper was as simple as what you had in your hand and what was left in the jug. But if you were lucky, it was cornbread and buttermilk, and that was enough. This was a meal of the Southern working class, through and through. But its reach stretched farther than the Mason-Dixon line. From the cotton fields of Georgia to the hollers of Appalachia, across Mississippi front porches and Arkansas kitchens, you'd find someone, somewhere, ending the day with a bowl of crumbled cornbread swimming in cold, tangy buttermilk. To some, it was poverty food. To others, it was comfort. But to those who grew up with it, it was a ritual, a kind of edible prayer, a quiet, slow meal at the end of a hard day's work, when conversation came in sighs and the radio murmured low in the corner. It wasn't about presentation or variety, it was about satisfaction. See, cornbread was already a staple in these homes. You made a pan every few days, yellow or white cornmeal, no sugar if you asked most traditionalists, baked in a cast iron skillet slicked with lard or bacon drippings. The crust crisped up while the center stayed soft, begging for a pat of butter if you had any left. But when the bread went stale, or when money ran tighter than tight, that's when this meal came into play. The ingredients were almost laughably simple: cornbread and buttermilk. Maybe a sprinkle of salt, maybe not. Some folks added a little onion for bite. Others swore by a spoonful of bacon grease stirred in warm. But mostly, it was just the basics. Crumble the cornbread into a bowl and pour the buttermilk over top until it was good and soggy. That was it. No cooking, no measuring, no fuss. The first spoonful was always cold and sharp, the buttermilk's tang waking up the sweetness of the corn. Then came the soft bite, dense but airy, like spooning up memory itself. You ate it slow, not because it was fancy, but because there was nothing else to rush toward. This dish was especially common during the Great Depression, when families had to stretch every crumb, but it never truly disappeared. Through the rationing of the 1940s, the strikes of the 1950s, and the wage squeezes of the 70s, it held on. It didn't need refrigeration beyond the buttermilk jug, and it could be made in minutes. Even now, in some parts of the South, it's not unusual to see older folks enjoy it as a bedtime snack, something that tastes like their childhood, like their grandparents, like a world slower and quieter than this one. Zoom in on a bowl being slowly stirred with a spoon. Steam curls around the edges of the camera frame. A faded voice crackles faintly from a radio, a gospel hymn in the background. It didn't need meat. It didn't need garnish. It needed nothing but what was already there. And somehow, that was everything. It was humble, it was homespun, and it was holy in its own small way. A bowl of crumbled cornbread and buttermilk. Supper for the soul. Tomato gravy over biscuits. Slide transition. A close-up of warm split biscuits with a river of red gravy spilling down their sides. Cut to a 1950s kitchen, pale blue cabinets, a worn flour tin, and a cast iron skillet on the stove. It was red, rich, and just a little bit rebellious. Tomato gravy didn't ask permission to be supper. It just showed up and fed the whole family. Before marinara took over the pasta aisle and before ketchup reigned supreme on every diner table, there was tomato gravy, a southern staple that stretched a can of tomatoes tomatoes into a meal that could fill plates, hearts, and hungry bellies. This wasn't spaghetti sauce, and it sure wasn't soup. This was something different. Something born in the skillet, meant to be ladled over biscuits, so tender they steamed when you split them. If sausage gravy was the golden child of country breakfast, tomato gravy was its scrappier cousin. Less luxurious, but no less loved. Tomato gravy emerged from necessity. In kitchens where meat was a rarity and cream was a luxury, folks had to make do with what they had. And what they had, often enough, was flour, fat, and a can of tomatoes. If you were lucky, you had bacon drippings saved in a jar near the stove. If you were really lucky, you had fresh tomatoes from the garden, ripened on the vine, kissed by the sun, and just about ready to burst. It was Depression-era cooking at its most ingenious. Stretch what you've got, thicken what's thin, and flavor it with love and grit. The making of tomato gravy started the same way any good Southern gravy does, with a roux. You'd melt a spoonful of bacon grease or lard in a heavy skillet until it shimmered. Then in went the flour, stirred with a wooden spoon until it bubbled and turned the color of old ivory. Not too dark, you weren't making gumbo, just enough to bring out that toasty smell. Then came the tomatoes. Maybe they were canned stewed tomatoes, maybe whole tomatoes crushed by hand, maybe even leftover slices that didn't make it into lunch sandwiches. You'd pour them into the pan and hear the sizzle, the sudden angry hiss of acid meeting fat. Then came the slow stir, salt, pepper, a pinch of sugar to tame the tang, and maybe, just maybe, a flake of red pepper or a splash of milk, depending on the household. You'd let it simmer. The whole room would smell like something hearty and warm. It wasn't just tomato. It was toasted flour, pork fat, and patience. It thickened just enough to cling to a spoon, but still pour like satin. You could see the flecks of tomato pulp swimming in the sauce, little ruby reminders of where it all started. And then, oh yes, the biscuits. No store-bought tubes here. These were flour and shortening miracles, cut by hand, baked in cast iron, browned on the bottom and soft in the middle. You'd split them open, watch the steam rise, and then drown them in that red gold gravy until the plate looked like it came from a dream. It might be breakfast, it might be lunch, it might be the only hot meal of the day, but it felt like something grand. Camera pans out. A kitchen window open to the breeze, a mama's hands wiping flour off her apron, two kids grinning with their forks ready. Tomato gravy wasn't fancy. It wasn't gourmet, but in a world that often took more than it gave, it offered a little something back, a bite of warmth, a splash of color, and a full belly by supper's end. That's more than a sauce. That's survival, smothered and served hot. Mock apple pie, no apples required. Slide transition. A vintage pie dish sits on a windowsill. Golden crust cracked slightly to reveal a warm, cinnamon-spiced filling. The camera zooms in as a fork gently lifts a slice, steam curling into the air. It tasted just like apple pie, but there wasn't an apple in sight, just crackers, sugar, and the audacity to pretend. When the Great Depression swept across the country, it didn't just take jobs and homes. It took small luxuries, like fresh fruit, especially apples, which became expensive and hard to find in many areas. But American cooks are nothing if not stubborn. And when they couldn't have the real thing, they invented a clever substitute. Mock apple pie. Now, this wasn't some sad stand-in. It tasted like apple pie, smelled like apple pie, looked like apple pie, but it was made with nothing more than Ritz crackers, sugar, lemon juice, a sprinkle of cinnamon, and a heaping dose of optimism. Nabisco themselves helped popularize the recipe, printing it on Ritz boxes during the 1930s and 40s. Housewives clipped it, shared it, memorized it. It became a kitchen legend, not just for its taste, but for what it symbolized: resilience, imagination, and the joy of fooling your taste buds with what you had in the cupboard. Making it was a little like magic. You'd start by crushing Ritz crackers, not too fine, just enough to mimic the texture of soft baked apples. Into a pie shell they'd go, layered gently, like you were treating them with respect. Then came the syrup. Water, white sugar, lemon juice, and a touch of cream of tartar boiled into a sweet, tangy liquid. You'd pour that over the crackers and let them soak, swelling slightly, softening, transforming. Next came the cinnamon, maybe a pinch of nutmeg if the spice rack hadn't run dry. Then a top crust, homemade if you could, store-bought if you had one, patched together from leftover dough if need be. You'd seal the edges, cut a few vents, and slide it into the oven. As it baked, the whole house would fill with that unmistakable smell: buttery crust, warm sugar, spiced filling. Anyone walking by the kitchen would swear you were baking apple pie, and once you sliced into it, even your tongue would be fooled. The texture, the flavor, it was uncanny. A ghost of the original, sure, but still sweet and familiar. Camera cuts to a child taking a bite, then looking up, wide-eyed, and saying, "I thought we didn't have apples." A mother smiles knowingly in the background. Mock apple pie wasn't a trick. It was a triumph. Proof that even in the leanest times, a little sweetness could still find its way to the table. Liver and onions. Slide transition. A heavy cast iron skillet sizzles on the stovetop. Thin slices of liver curl at the edges, while golden brown onions soften and caramelize beside them. The camera zooms in through a veil of savory steam. You either loved it or learned to. Liver and onions wasn't just a dish, it was a rite of passage. For generations of working-class families, liver wasn't an exotic organ meat or a forgotten cut. It was dinner, a powerhouse of iron, protein, and B vitamins. It came cheap at the butcher counter and could stretch to feed a family of 5 for the price of one steak. It wasn't always greeted with cheers from the kids, but in homes where meat was a luxury, liver was a godsend. When the fridge was nearly empty and payday was still 2 days out, you could count on liver and onions to fill the gap. And it had a way of sticking to your memory almost as much as it stuck to your ribs. The ingredients were bare bones: a pound or so of sliced beef or calf liver, dredged in flour, 1 or 2 large yellow onions, sliced thin, a bit of fat for the skillet, bacon grease, lard, or even margarine if nothing else was around, salt and pepper to taste, and if you were lucky, a splash of milk for soaking. Some cooks swore by soaking the liver in milk first, said it mellowed the strong flavor, made it tender. Others didn't bother. Either way, you'd start with the onions. Into the skillet they went, sizzling and softening, transforming from sharp and bitter to sweet and golden. The smell alone could make a kitchen feel rich. Then came the liver, floured and laid into the pan, searing fast on each side. It didn't take long. Overcooking turned it tough as boot leather, but just the right timing gave it a soft, velvety bite with just a whisper of the iron tang that gave it its reputation. You'd serve it hot, right off the stove, with a mound of onions piled on top. Maybe with mashed potatoes on the side, maybe just a slice of white bread to mop up the juices. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't delicate, but it was filling, honest. And for some families, it was one of the few regular sources of meat. Cut to a vintage 1960s kitchen, a mother in a print apron plating liver on melamine dishes, her children grimacing playfully. She just smiles and spoons on more onions. It may not have been everyone's favorite, but it was nourishing, it showed up, it did the job. And if you were raised on it, chances are you remember it more fondly now than you ever did then. That's the funny thing about food from hard times. It grows sweeter in memory, even when it didn't taste sweet at the time. Creamed peas on toast. Slide transition. Soft focus on a plate of buttered toast blanketed in thick white sauce. Green peas poking through like little emeralds. The camera pans slowly across a modest 1940s breakfast table. Tin cups, a cloth napkin, and a single dish front and center. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't festive, but creamed peas on toast showed up on dinner tables like a gentle promise. You may not have much, but you've still got something warm. This dish came from the school of stretch it further. A tablespoon of flour, a cup of milk, a pat of butter, and suddenly, that lonely can of peas could become supper. It was born out of lean times and quick thinking, when meat was sparse, vegetables were canned, and everyone had to figure out how to make the most out of very little. It was especially common during World War II, when ration books were gospel and every bite mattered. Victory gardens might have yielded some fresh peas if you were lucky, but more often, it came from the pantry, flat-topped cans lined up like soldiers on a shelf. The beauty of this dish was its simplicity and its speed. You could have it on the table in 15 minutes, and it left everyone just full enough to keep going. You started with the roux, a modest dollop of butter or bacon grease melted in a saucepan. In went a spoonful of flour, stirred until it bubbled and smelled nutty, forming that familiar thickening base. Then the milk, added slowly, whisked smooth. The sauce would begin to thicken, silky and pale. Then came the peas, drained from the can or cooked fresh from the garden, stirred gently into the white sauce until warmed through. A dash of salt, a crack of pepper. Some folks added a touch of onion powder or a pinch of sugar. Others stirred in a bit of cheese if they had any left from the week's allotment. But mostly, it stayed simple. And the toast? It had to be sturdy. Sliced bread toasted until golden, stacked 2 to a plate. The gravy was ladled on while everything was still hot, soaking the bread's middle, leaving the edges just crisp enough to catch the last bites. It wasn't glamorous, but it had heart. It was often served on Friday nights in Catholic homes avoiding meat, or as a quick fix during post-war recovery when cupboards looked a little bare. Cut to a quiet supper scene, 2 kids swinging their legs at the table, a father hunched from factory work, a mother wiping her hands on her apron as she sets down one more plate. Creamed peas on toast was more than just a thrifty meal. It was proof that even the smallest things could be made to feel like comfort. It was pale green, soft and warm, the kind of food that wrapped around your bones and whispered, "You'll be all right." Johnny cakes, fried cornmeal cakes, approx 500 words. Slide transition. A hot griddle sizzles as spoonfuls of cornmeal batter hit the surface. Golden edges crisp up as the camera pans to an old wooden table, a mason jar of syrup nearby, steam curling from a plate stacked high with fried cakes. They went by many names: hoe cakes, journey cakes, ash cakes. But one bite of a hot Johnny cake and you knew you were eating history. Long before sliced bread and boxed pancake mix, there were Johnny cakes. These sturdy little cornmeal patties go all the way back to early colonial days and likely even further, descended from indigenous cooking methods and ingredients long before Europeans set foot on the continent. Corn, after all, was the grain of survival, and these cakes were the working man's way of putting it to good use. You'd find Johnny cakes frying on iron griddles from Rhode Island to the Carolinas, and just as often in the hills of Appalachia as along the banks of the Mississippi. They were road food for travelers, breakfast for laborers, and sometimes the only thing on the table when money was gone and the pantry echoed back. The basic ingredients were simple and always on hand: cornmeal, boiling water, and a pinch of salt. That's it. Some versions added a splash of milk or bacon grease if you had it, maybe even a spoonful of sugar for the kids. But at its core, the Johnny cake was stripped down sustenance. The method was part of the magic. You'd pour boiling water over a bowl of cornmeal and stir it with a wooden spoon until it thickened into a sticky batter, thick enough to hold its shape, but loose enough to drop by the spoonful. The mixture rested a minute, thickening as it cooled. Then onto the griddle it went. A slick of fat, lard, bacon drippings, or butter was heated until shimmering. Spoonfuls of the batter were flattened with the back of a spoon, sizzling the moment they touched the heat. You'd let them cook slow, turning just once, until the edges crisped up and the center firmed into something chewy and warm. They weren't fluffy like pancakes. They were denser, heartier, meant to last, eaten plain, with syrup, butter, molasses, or even split and filled with ham or beans if the meal called for more heft. They were eaten hot off the griddle or cold out of a work lunch pail the next day. Cut to a farm kitchen, 1930s. A mother stands by the stove flipping cakes with one hand while cradling a baby in the other. Two barefoot children wait by the table, hands folded, stomachs growling. Johnny cakes didn't promise more than they could give, but what they gave, warmth, fullness, the taste of something made with care, was always enough. Boiled cabbage and potatoes. Slide transition. A large enamel pot on a stovetop, lid slightly askew as steam escapes. Inside, pale green cabbage leaves float among chunks of soft yellow potato. A slotted spoon hovers, ready to serve. It wasn't much to look at, but boiled cabbage and potatoes could fill a pot, a belly, and a long, hungry evening. This was peasant food in the truest and proudest sense. A dish born in Ireland, carried across the Atlantic by immigrants seeking a better life, and planted firmly in the American working-class kitchen. Cheap, reliable, nourishing. You could feed a family for pennies with one pot and a bit of salt. For Irish immigrants in the 1800s and early 1900s, cabbage and potatoes were the bedrock of survival. And when they came to the States, settling in coal towns, tenement buildings, and railroad camps, they brought the recipe with them. It found kinship with Appalachian kitchens, Depression-era tables, and Southern stew pots. Anywhere people knew how to stretch a vegetable and make a dollar weep, this dish thrived. The ingredients were as humble as the folks who cooked them. A firm head of green cabbage, quartered or sliced into thick wedges. 4 to 5 potatoes, russets if you had them, any kind if you didn't, peeled and chopped into large chunks, water enough to cover and salt by the pinchful. Some households added onion. Others threw in a bit of fatback or a bouillon cube for flavor. But often, it was just cabbage, potatoes, water, and will. You'd bring the pot to a boil and then let it simmer low, covered, until the potatoes softened and the cabbage turned tender and translucent. The kitchen would fill with the grassy, earthy scent of boiled greens, pungent to some, comforting to others. That smell meant food was coming, and food meant you'd make it another day. Some folks drained off the water and mashed it all together, dousing it with pepper and butter if they had any. Others ladled it straight into bowls with the broth, letting the spoon clink gently against the rim. And if there was meat, a scrap of ham, a leftover sausage link from breakfast, it was like striking gold. It might not have been anyone's favorite meal as a child, but it had staying power. It was dependable, and somehow, despite its plainness, it brought a kind of quiet satisfaction. It filled you up, warmed you through, and left enough for tomorrow. Cut to a 1910s tenement apartment kitchen. Walls thin, voices in the hallway, a pot bubbling on a small stove. A mother calls her children in, their cheeks pink from the cold. She serves each a steaming bowl. Boiled cabbage and potatoes didn't pretend. It simply offered what it had: warmth, softness, enough salt to wake up your tongue, and the strength to carry on. In a world that often took more than it gave, This dish gave back just enough, and sometimes enough was everything. Oatmeal mush. Slide transition. A thick slice of golden brown mush sizzles on a cast iron skillet. The screen softens as steam curls upward, giving way to a black and white photo of a child in overalls at a kitchen table, grinning beside a plate of fried oats. First it was porridge, then it was breakfast again, this time with a crust and a story to tell. Oatmeal mush might not sound poetic, but in kitchens where every spoonful had to count, it was pure genius. A 2-in-1 dish, hot cereal on day 1, fried breakfast on day 2. Nothing wasted, everything stretched. This was the kind of food that filled up bellies before the sun rose over the fields, before boots hit the mill floor, before school bells rang in drafty one-room schoolhouses. Oats were cheap, filling, shelf-stable, and when cooked down to a thick mush, they became the kind of stick-to-your-ribs breakfast that working folks depended on. It began simply. Rolled oats, or steel cut if you had them, cooked with water and a dash of salt until thick as paste. You'd stir it constantly with a wooden spoon, watching it bubble and burp on the stove like it had its own opinion. Some families made a big pot once and served it for several days, reheating with milk or water and sweetening each bowl however the cupboard allowed. Brown sugar, molasses, jam, even a splash of canned milk. But the real magic happened the next day. Leftover mush was poured into loaf pans or shallow trays and set in the icebox overnight. By morning, it was firm and sliceable, like pale golden bricks of possibility. You'd cut thick slabs, about the size of a playing card, and fry them in a hot, greased skillet until crisp on the outside and soft on the inside. The scent was something special, nutty, buttery, a little earthy. The crust would form like a pancake, but denser, chewier, and the inside would melt just a little, warm and gentle. It was humble food, but it had texture, history, even a little pride. Some folks ate it plain, others dusted it with cinnamon sugar or drizzled syrup on top. And if you were real lucky, you might get a pat of butter melting into the top like the sun over a wheat field. It was breakfast, dessert, and tradition, all rolled into one golden square. Cut to a coal miner's kitchen, 1920s. His wife fries slices while he buttons his work shirt. Their son waits by the stove, swinging his legs and sniffing the air with a smile. It wasn't flashy, but it did more than just feed you. Oatmeal mush reminded you that leftovers weren't second best. They were a second chance. Peanut butter and syrup sandwiches. Slide transition. A close-up of 2 slices of soft white bread, one slathered thick with peanut butter, the other drizzled with golden syrup. As the slices come together, the camera catches the slow ooze at the edges. A child's hand grabs the sandwich, cut to black. Sticky, sweet, and just enough protein to carry a kid through the afternoon. It wasn't fancy. It was fuel disguised as a treat. There was nothing glamorous about this sandwich. It didn't come with deli meat or crisp lettuce. It didn't need refrigeration or a lunchbox with a cool pack. But in countless lunch sacks, coat pockets, and after-school kitchen tables, peanut butter and syrup sandwiches were a regular guest. Cheap, fast, and surprisingly satisfying. Born from pantry staples and built for hard times, this sandwich became a staple in Depression-era households and stayed there long after prosperity returned. Why? Because it was dependable, and because kids loved it, even if they didn't know they were eating on the edge of thrift. At its heart was peanut butter, the great equalizer. High in calories, full of protein, and shelf-stable for weeks, it was one of the most important ingredients in working-class kitchens. Combined with syrup, any syrup, it transformed from savory to sweet and stuck to your ribs like a good story on a front porch swing. The syrup varied by household. Some used Caro corn syrup, clear and thick as honey. Others used sorghum, molasses, or even homemade cane syrup from local farms. Whatever you had, you'd drizzle just enough over the peanut butter to darken its color and add a slick sheen, then quickly slap the other slice of bread on top before it ran wild. The first bite always made your teeth stick together. That slow chew, the peanut butter coating your mouth, the syrup sliding in with just enough sugar to make your toes curl. It was simple pleasure on a shoestring, and if the bread was a little stale, all the better. It held together under pressure. Some families added banana slices, others a sprinkle of sugar, but mostly it was just those 2 things, peanut butter and syrup. You could wrap it in wax paper and carry it to the field, pack it in a school lunch, or eat it while sitting on the front step, watching cars go by. Cut to a 1950s kitchen. A mother in curlers spreads peanut butter onto bread while her son waits impatiently at the table, swinging his legs and humming. She folds the sandwich, hands it to him, and tousles his hair. In a world where sweets were rare and money was tight, Peanut butter and syrup sandwiches offered just a little joy between two slices of bread. It didn't cost much, it didn't take much, but somehow it filled the gap between hunger and happiness and left fingerprints on your soul, and maybe the kitchen counter too. Goulash, Midwestern style. Slide transition. A bubbling pot filled with elbow macaroni, ground beef, and rich tomato sauce. The camera pans across a 1970s laminate kitchen counter, a wooden spoon stirring through steam as dinner hums on the stove. It wasn't Hungarian, it wasn't exotic, but in Midwest kitchens from the 40s to the 80s, goulash was king, and the crown was cheap ground beef. This version of goulash didn't come from the old country, even if the name tried to pretend. It came from potlucks, church basements, and school cafeteria lines. A dish with immigrant roots, Americanized by necessity, Midwestern goulash was a one-pot wonder, cheap, filling, and hard to mess up. It became especially popular during and after the Great Depression, as families looked for ways to stretch meat and fill plates fast. The backbone of this meal was ground beef, whatever was on sale, often fatty and frozen. That got browned in a big skillet, seasoned just enough to make it interesting, and joined by onion and elbow macaroni, those squat little pasta tubes that somehow multiplied when cooked. Tomato sauce pulled it all together. Sometimes it was canned tomatoes crushed by hand. Sometimes it was tomato soup or paste thinned with water. Spices? If you had garlic powder or oregano, you might toss some in, but mostly it was salt, pepper, and hope. The genius of Midwestern goulash wasn't complexity, it was reliability. It could be made in a single pot, doubled for company, reheated for lunches, or scooped into Tupperware for busy weeknights. Kids liked it, adults tolerated it. It was the great equalizer of meat and carb cooking. Making it was an act of muscle memory. First, you browned the ground beef with chopped onion until the smell filled the house. Then in went the garlic or whatever seasoning you had. Next came the tomato, sauce, soup, or stewed chunks, depending on the pantry's mood. And last, the macaroni, already boiled and drained, folded in gently until it soaked up the sauce. You let it simmer until it thickened, the noodles soft, the flavors cozy. Some folks added corn or peas, especially if there were kids to please. Others threw in cheese at the end, a handful of shredded cheddar to bring it all together. Cut to a 1960s ranch house dining room. A teenage boy heaps a second helping on his plate while his father, just home from the factory, tucks in silently. A woman wipes her hands on her apron and finally sits down with a tired smile. It wasn't glamorous, but it was dependable. It fed the hungry, stretched the budget, and filled the silence of long days with the clink of spoons on enamel plates. Midwestern goulash didn't ask to be celebrated, but it earned its place in memory with every warm bite and second scoop. Hot water cornbread, slide, transition, sizzling patties hit a hot skillet, oil bubbling at the edges. The camera zooms in on a golden crust forming, crisp and dimpled, as a hand flips each one with care. Cut to a wooden table set with cast iron, a tin of lard nearby. No eggs, no milk, no fluff. Just cornmeal, boiling water, and a skillet hot enough to make a preacher cuss. Hot water cornbread is pure southern grit on a plate. A recipe so stripped down, it almost dares you to doubt it. But once you bite into that crackling crust and soft, warm center, you understand. Less really is more. This dish goes way back, before the Depression, before the turn of the century. Brought from African-American kitchens across the South, it's one of those recipes passed down by demonstration, not by cookbook. A handful of this, a splash of that, shaped with weathered hands and fried with memory. It was a staple because it was dependable. No need for eggs, no dairy, just plain cornmeal, salt, and boiling water stirred into a thick, gritty batter. The boiling water helped the cornmeal bloom, binding it without anything fancy. That batter was scooped or shaped into patties, sometimes small and round, sometimes longer like little logs, and dropped straight into hot fat. The frying was where the real magic happened. A cast iron skillet, shallow with oil or lard, blazing hot. Each piece went in with a sizzle, puffing slightly as it hit the surface. You didn't flip them too soon, just waited until the edges turned golden and crisp, then carefully turned them to reveal that glorious, toasted brown underside. Inside, they stayed soft and just a little dense, something between a hush puppy and a pancake. Eaten hot off the pan, they were perfect on their own, or dipped in beans, greens, or molasses. Some folks even crumbled them into milk, turning scraps into supper. During hard times, hot water cornbread showed up often. It took almost nothing to make and left you feeling like you'd eaten something real. A bowl of beans and a couple of these cakes could carry a family through lean weeks, and when times got better, it stayed on the table, not as a fallback, but as a tradition. Cut to a modest kitchen. An older woman flips cornbread patties with practiced rhythm. Her granddaughter watches from the counter, eyes wide as she steals a piece too early and blows on her fingers. Hot water cornbread wasn't just survival food, it was pride food, born from ingenuity and passed down in cast iron and quiet wisdom. No recipe card required, just heat, hands, and history. Fried bologna sandwiches. Slide transition. A frying pan over medium heat, the pink circle of a bologna slice sizzling as its edges curl up like a little pork sombrero. Cut to a lunch counter scene. Formica countertop, red stools, and a stack of white bread waiting nearby. You knew it was ready when it puffed up like a hat. Fried bologna, simple, loud, and absolutely unapologetic. In homes where steak was rare and ham was a holiday miracle, bologna was the people's meat. It came cheap, it lasted long, and when fried just right, it hit the soul like something far fancier. The fried bologna sandwich was the blue-collar burger, the poor man's deli delight, and it didn't need frills to feel complete. This dish belongs to corner stores, school lunchboxes, and factory break rooms. It was beloved in southern kitchens, Midwestern diners, and Appalachian stovetops alike. If you had a skillet, a slice of bologna, and a piece of bread, you had a meal. Maybe not gourmet, but good, real good. Bologna came in fat rounds, stacked high in plastic packaging, or sliced fresh from the deli counter if you had a little extra that week. It was all mystery meat, beef, pork, chicken, or whatever was on hand at the plant. But once it hit that hot pan, sizzling in lard or oil or margarine, it transformed. The edges would curl up, forming a crispy lip, while the center puffed into a dome. You had to press it down with a spatula, or cut a slit to keep it flat, an old trick passed down with a grin. As it browned, the scent filled the kitchen with something close to bacon, but uniquely its own, smoky, salty, and rich with fat. While the meat cooked, you'd toast the bread, if you had time. Sometimes you'd leave it soft and plain, letting it soak up the grease and flavor. Sometimes you'd butter it. Maybe you'd melt a slice of American cheese on the meat in the last minute of frying. Maybe not. The sandwich itself was almost always served hot. Bologna on bread, maybe a swipe of mustard, a slice of tomato if the garden was kind that week, occasionally a crisp leaf of iceberg or a fried egg. But more often, it was just the basics. Hot meat, soft bread, a little bite from the condiment jar. Cut to a 1970s kitchen. A teenager grabs a sandwich off the counter on his way out the door. His little sister's already eating hers at the table, legs swinging, mustard on her chin. It wasn't fancy, but it was familiar. It tasted like Saturdays, school vacations, and all the times you didn't have much, but you had enough. Fried bologna sandwiches didn't pretend to be anything they weren't, and that's exactly why they stayed on tables and in memories for decades. Tomato gravy over biscuits. Tomato gravy over biscuits might sound simple, but in working-class kitchens during hard times, it was nothing short of a small miracle. When fresh meat was scarce and canned tomatoes were a pantry staple, this dish turned basic ingredients into something comforting and hearty. Imagine a plate piled high with soft, flaky biscuits, warm and buttery, just begging for a generous ladle of tangy, smooth tomato gravy. The gravy, made by simmering canned tomatoes with a bit of butter and flour to thicken, carries a hint of sweetness and acidity that wakes up your taste buds without breaking the bank. For families stretched thin, this was a way to stretch biscuits into a meal, pairing tender bread with the rich red sauce that reminded them even tough days could be flavorful. It's humble, satisfying, and a beautiful reminder that love and resourcefulness could fill a plate and a heart. Fried catfish with cornmeal. Fried catfish with cornmeal was a working-class treasure, especially in southern kitchens where rivers and lakes offered fresh fish to families who couldn't afford much else. The secret lay in the simple preparation. Fresh catfish fillets coated in a mixture of cornmeal seasoned with salt and pepper, then fried in hot oil until golden and crispy. The cornmeal crust provided a crunchy texture that contrasted perfectly with the tender, flaky fish inside. Often served with a squeeze of lemon or a dash of hot sauce, this dish carried the flavor of riverbank afternoons and family gatherings on the porch. It wasn't fancy, but it was a proud plate that proved even the simplest ingredients could become something special. In tough times, this crispy fried catfish was a reminder that good food and good company could still bring comfort and joy to any table. Sweet potato casserole. Sweet potato casserole was a working-class holiday favorite, a dish that brought warmth and a touch of sweetness to tables stretched thin by hard times. Simple mashed sweet potatoes formed the base, naturally creamy and rich with a gentle earthiness. Brown sugar and butter folded in gave the casserole a caramelized sweetness, turning humble tubers into a cozy, comforting treat. Some families added a crunchy topping of marshmallows or pecans when they could afford a little extra indulgence, creating a contrast of textures that made every bite special. Baked until bubbly and golden, this casserole was more than just a side dish. It was a symbol of resilience and celebration, a reminder that even in lean years, there was room for a little joy and sweetness at the table. It carried the taste of family, tradition, and the enduring spirit of making the most out of what you had. Chicken and dumplings. Chicken and dumplings is the kind of dish that feels like a warm hug on a cold day, a true working-class classic that stretched a bit of chicken into a meal that fed the whole family. The stew starts with simmering tender pieces of chicken and broth until the meat falls off the bone, filling the kitchen with savory, comforting aromas. The dumplings, made from simple dough of flour and water or milk, are dropped by spoonfuls into the bubbling pot, cooking until soft and pillowy. This meal was all about turning basic pantry staples and leftover meat into something hearty and satisfying. It was the go-to comfort food when times were tough, but love and ingenuity were plentiful. Every spoonful offered a taste of home, a little nourishment for body and soul, proving that sometimes the simplest dishes carry the deepest meaning. Rice and beans. Rice and beans stand as one of the most enduring working-class dishes, simple, affordable, and packed with nourishing flavor. This humble combo was a staple in countless American homes, especially when meat was a luxury and stretching meals was a must. The beauty lies in its simplicity. White rice, cooked fluffy and light, paired with slow-simmered beans seasoned with onion, garlic, and a bit of salt and pepper. Sometimes, a splash of broth or a scrap of ham added depth, but mostly, it was a celebration of pantry basics turned satisfying. This dish crosses cultural lines, with each region putting its own spin on the seasoning or bean variety. In hard times, rice and beans weren't just food, they were a symbol of resilience, resourcefulness, and a reminder that sometimes the plainest things bring the greatest comfort and strength to the table. Grits with butter and cheese. Grits with butter and cheese was a beloved staple, especially in southern working-class homes where this creamy cornmeal porridge brightened many a breakfast table. Made by slowly simmering ground corn until smooth and thick, grits were simple but filling, a perfect way to start a day when money was tight but hunger was real. A generous pat of butter melted in, adding richness and a silky texture, while a sprinkle of sharp cheese brought savory depth and a touch of indulgence without a heavy price tag. This dish was the morning fuel for hardworking hands and long days, offering warmth and comfort with every spoonful. Easy to make and endlessly adaptable, grits stood as a humble but proud testament to Southern heritage and the resourcefulness of families who made the most of what they had. Tuna noodle casserole. Tuna noodle casserole became a mid-century working-class hero, especially in the post-war years when canned goods made quick, affordable meals possible. This humble casserole combined tender egg noodles, flaky canned tuna, and creamy soup, often mushroom or cream of celery, mixed with peas or other available veggies. Topped with crunchy breadcrumbs or crushed crackers, it baked into a bubbly, golden-topped dish that felt hearty and comforting without costing a fortune. For many families, this casserole was the ultimate pantry meal, turning simple ingredients into a warm, filling dinner that stretched to feed hungry kids and weary adults alike. Its creamy texture and mild flavors made it a soothing favorite, one that could be easily customized depending on what was on hand. Tuna noodle casserole carries the taste of thrift, practicality, and the joy of gathering around a shared plate after a long day. Baked beans and hot dogs. Baked beans and hot dogs was the quintessential quick and hearty working-class meal, especially popular in post-war America when convenience met economy. Canned baked beans, rich, sweet, and smoky, were transformed into a full meal by slicing up inexpensive hot dogs and stirring them in. The mixture was heated slowly, allowing the flavors to meld into a sticky, savory stew that smelled like comfort itself. This dish was a backyard staple, a lunchbox favorite, and a weeknight savior, perfect for families juggling tight budgets and busy schedules. Served with simple white bread or a side of coleslaw, it was filling, flavorful, and guaranteed to please kids and adults alike. Baked beans and hot dogs carry the unmistakable taste of nostalgia and practicality, a dish born from necessity, but loved for its hearty simplicity and warmth. Cream-chipped beef on toast. Known affectionately as SOS in military and working-class kitchens, cream-chipped beef on toast was the ultimate budget comfort food. Made from dried, salted beef sliced thin and simmered in a creamy white sauce, it stretched a little meat into a generous, hearty meal. The sauce, thickened with butter, flour, and milk, was rich and velvety, coating every bite with a savory, slightly salty punch. Served over warm buttered toast, this dish was a go-to for families who needed something filling and fast. It carried the practical spirit of making do and making good, transforming humble pantry staples into something that felt indulgent and satisfying. Though it might sound plain today, for many it was a nostalgic reminder of simpler times, a dish that brought people together over a warm plate during uncertain days. Bread pudding with raisins. Bread pudding with raisins was a shining example of thrift and sweetness in hard times. When fresh desserts were a luxury, stale bread found new life soaked in a custardy mixture of milk, eggs, sugar, and cinnamon, studded with plump raisins for a touch of natural sweetness. Baked until golden and slightly puffed, this humble pudding was a warm, comforting treat that made the most of leftovers. It was often served as a dessert or even a simple breakfast, offering a soft, tender texture with bursts of fruity surprise. For working-class families, bread pudding was proof that you didn't need fancy ingredients to make something delicious and satisfying. Every bite told a story of resourcefulness and love, of making do with what was on hand and turning scarcity into something sweet and memorable. Skillet corned beef hash. Skillet corned beef hash was a hearty working-class breakfast born from leftover corned beef and whatever potatoes were on hand. This dish turned modest scraps into a crispy, savory meal that warmed kitchens and filled hungry bellies. The corned beef was chopped fine and tossed with diced, cooked potatoes, onions, and sometimes a splash of pepper or Worcestershire sauce for extra kick. Fried together in a hot skillet until golden brown and slightly crunchy, it was a satisfying mix of textures and flavors, saltiness from the beef, sweetness from caramelized onions, and earthiness from the potatoes. Often served with eggs on top, this hash was a go-to dish for families looking to stretch leftovers without sacrificing taste. It's a humble, resourceful recipe that speaks to the heart of working-class cooking, turning thrift into flavor and leftovers into love. Chicken and rice soup. Chicken and rice soup is the ultimate working-class comfort, simple, nourishing, and endlessly adaptable. When fresh chicken was available, nothing went to waste. The meat simmered slowly in water with onions, carrots, and celery to create a gentle broth rich with homey flavors. Rice was added last, absorbing the broth's warmth and swelling into tender, filling grains that stretched the meal farther. This soup was a staple during lean times, perfect for soothing colds or warming cold hands after a long day of work. The recipe's beauty was in its simplicity. Basic pantry staples transformed through slow cooking into a bowl that comforted the body and soul. Often seasoned with a bit of salt and pepper, it required no fancy ingredients, just time and care. Chicken and rice soup remains a testament to humble nourishment and the timeless power of a warm bowl shared with family. Fried green tomatoes. Fried green tomatoes are a beloved Southern working-class classic that turned unripened, tart tomatoes into crispy, golden bites of comfort. When the garden's bounty was still maturing, green tomatoes were sliced thick, dipped in seasoned cornmeal, and fried in hot oil until their edges curled into a crunchy crust, while the inside stayed juicy and tangy. This dish was a clever way to extend the tomato season and add texture and flavor to simple meals. Often served as a side or a snack, fried green tomatoes were perfect alongside fried chicken or slathered with a bit of homemade sauce. Their satisfying crunch and slightly tart flavor made them stand out among humble dishes, and they carried a nostalgic reminder of Southern kitchens bustling with family and the resourcefulness born of necessity. Even today, they're a delicious nod to the past and a celebration of simple, soulful cooking. Shepherd's pie. Shepherd's pie was a comforting working-class classic that transformed inexpensive ground meat and leftover vegetables into a warm, satisfying casserole. The base was a savory mix of ground beef or lamb, simmered with onions, carrots, and peas in a rich gravy, all packed with flavor despite humble ingredients. The savory filling was topped with a thick layer of creamy mashed potatoes, smoothed and fluffed before baking until golden and slightly crisp on top. It was a practical way to stretch meat and vegetables, turning simple leftovers into a full meal that could feed a family on a budget. This dish carries the heart of thrift and home-style cooking, proof that a little care and layering could elevate basic pantry staples into a plateful of comfort. Shepherd's pie was a crowd pleaser, filling the home with warmth and the scent of love on a tight budget. Meatloaf with ketchup glaze. Meatloaf with ketchup glaze was a working-class dinner table staple, turning ground beef into a hearty, affordable centerpiece. This recipe stretched every bit of meat with breadcrumbs soaked in milk, eggs for binding, and simple seasonings like onion and salt. The loaf was shaped by hand, then topped with a tangy layer of ketchup mixed with a bit of brown sugar or vinegar, creating a shiny, sweet glaze that caramelized beautifully in the oven. Baking slowly, the meatloaf developed a juicy interior with a slightly crispy, flavorful crust. For families watching their budgets, meatloaf was a way to feed many without breaking the bank. It's a dish wrapped in nostalgia, reminding us of home-cooked warmth, family dinners around the table, and the comforting aroma that greeted everyone at the end of a long day. Split pea soup. Split pea soup was a thick, hearty lifeline for working-class families, especially in the colder months when a warm, filling meal was essential. Made from dried split peas, a ham bone or leftover pork, and simple vegetables like onions, carrots, and celery, this soup stretched pantry staples into a creamy, protein-packed meal. The peas simmered slowly until they broke down into a velvety texture, while the smoky ham added depth and richness. It was a dish born from thrift and tradition. No fancy ingredients, just time and patience, turning humble staples into something satisfying. Often served with crusty bread or cornbread, split pea soup warmed bellies and spirits alike. It was more than sustenance. It was a reminder that even the simplest ingredients, carefully prepared, could provide comfort and strength during tough times. Potato salad with mustard. Potato salad with mustard was a classic working-class picnic and potluck favorite, turning boiled potatoes into a tangy, creamy side dish full of flavor and texture. The potatoes were cooked just until tender, then tossed with a simple dressing made from yellow mustard, mayonnaise, and a splash of vinegar for zing. Finely chopped onions or celery often joined the mix, adding crunch and freshness. This salad was easy to prepare, budget-friendly, and perfect for stretching inexpensive potatoes into a dish that could accompany everything from fried chicken to barbecue. Its bright mustard tang cut through richer foods, making it a perfect balance of comfort and sharpness. For many families, it was a taste of summer and community, served on picnic tables or at family dinners. This potato salad carries the spirit of making humble ingredients shine through clever, simple seasoning. Clam chowder, New England style. New England clam chowder is a creamy, comforting soup that became a working-class favorite along the northeastern coast. This chowder combines fresh or canned clams with diced potatoes, onions, and sometimes celery, all simmered in a rich, thickened milk or cream base. The creamy broth wraps around tender potatoes and briny clams, delivering a satisfying, hearty bowl that warmed fishermen and families alike on chilly days. Thickened with a simple roux of butter and flour, the chowder's velvety texture is both soothing and filling, making it an ideal meal when resources were limited, but taste mattered. Often served with crusty bread or oyster crackers, this chowder spoke of coastal tradition and practical cooking, turning simple, local ingredients into a dish full of flavor and soul. It remains a timeless reminder of hard work, community, and the sea's bounty. Jell-O salad. Jell-O salad was a quirky and colorful working-class favorite, especially from the 1950s through the 1970s, when gelatin desserts became a symbol of budget-friendly creativity. Using flavored gelatin as a base, this dish combined canned fruits, like pineapple, cherries, or fruit cocktail, and sometimes vegetables or nuts for texture and surprise. The salad was chilled until firm, then sliced or scooped onto plates, offering a sweet, wobbly contrast to more savory dishes on the table. Its bright hues and playful texture made it a hit at potlucks, church suppers, and family dinners, adding a bit of whimsy to frugal meals. Though simple, Jell-O salad was a reminder of how working-class cooks embraced available ingredients and turned them into something festive and fun, creating joy and color even when times were tough. It's a retro relic that still sparks nostalgia and smiles today. Chili con carne. Chili con carne was a spicy, hearty stew that earned its place in working-class kitchens across America, especially in Texas and the Southwest. Ground beef, beans, tomatoes, and chili powder came together in a slow simmer, creating a thick, flavorful dish that could feed many on a tight budget. This stew was all about bold, warming spices and rich textures, perfect for cold nights or filling a hungry crowd after a long day's work. Beans added protein and bulk, stretching the meat farther without losing flavor. Served with simple sides like cornbread or rice, chili was both affordable and deeply satisfying. Its smoky, spicy aroma filled kitchens with a promise of comfort and resilience, proving that even humble ingredients, when combined with a little heat and heart, could create a meal that was both tough and tender, just like the families who relied on it. Tuna salad sandwich. The tuna salad sandwich was a quick, affordable, working-class favorite that turned a humble can of tuna into a flavorful, satisfying meal. Canned tuna was mixed with mayonnaise, and often a bit of chopped celery or onion for crunch and freshness. This creamy filling was spread thick on simple white bread, creating a sandwich that was easy to prepare, portable, and packed with protein. Perfect for packed lunches or a fast dinner, tuna salad sandwiches were a staple in many homes, especially when fresh meat was scarce or expensive. Its tangy, savory flavor made it a beloved comfort food that stretched budgets without skimping on taste. Served alongside pickles or chips, it was a reminder that simple pantry staples could come together to nourish both body and soul, a working-class triumph that remains a lunchbox classic today. Egg salad. Egg salad was a budget-friendly staple in working-class homes, prized for its simplicity and protein-packed goodness. Hard-boiled eggs were chopped or mashed and mixed with mayonnaise and a touch of mustard for a creamy, tangy spread. Sometimes a sprinkle of salt, pepper, or finely diced onion was added for a little extra flavor. This humble mixture found its way between slices of white bread or on crackers, making for a quick and satisfying meal or snack. Egg salad was especially popular during times when fresh meat was scarce or costly, offering an easy way to nourish families on a dime. Its soft texture and mild flavor made it a comfort food that crossed generations. This dish embodies the spirit of making the most with the least, turning pantry basics into something hearty, familiar, and undeniably satisfying. Chicken pot pie. Chicken pot pie was a classic working-class comfort food that turned simple, leftover chicken and vegetables into a warm, flaky, and satisfying meal. The filling combined tender chicken pieces with mixed vegetables, often peas, carrots, and onions, held together in a creamy gravy. All of this was nestled beneath a buttery pie crust, which baked to a golden, flaky finish that sealed in the hearty goodness. Pot pie was a perfect way to stretch leftovers and make a little meat go a long way, while offering a meal that felt special despite humble ingredients. Its hearty warmth filled kitchens and hearts alike, providing a sense of home and comfort on tough days. Whether baked in a large pan or individual dishes, chicken pot pie was a beloved tradition that spoke to the resourcefulness and love that defined working-class cooking. Fried cabbage with bacon. Fried cabbage with bacon was a smoky, simple side beloved in working-class kitchens. Crisp bacon rendered its fat, then shredded cabbage was sautéed until tender and slightly caramelized. The result was a flavorful, hearty dish that stretched inexpensive ingredients into a satisfying accompaniment for any meal. This humble recipe captured the spirit of thrift and soulful Southern cooking in every savory bite. Baked macaroni and cheese. Baked macaroni and cheese was a beloved working-class comfort food, combining elbow macaroni with a creamy cheese sauce. Topped with breadcrumbs or extra cheese, it baked until golden and bubbly, offering a crispy crust and gooey interior. This simple, satisfying dish stretched modest ingredients into a hearty meal, perfect for feeding families on a budget while delivering that rich, nostalgic taste of home-cooked love. Sloppy Joes. Sloppy Joes were a working-class favorite, turning ground beef into a tangy, saucy sandwich filling. Simmered with onions and tomato sauce, the messy, flavorful mix was piled high on soft buns. This easy, affordable meal was perfect for busy families, stretching inexpensive ingredients into a hearty dinner. Loved for its bold taste and simplicity, Sloppy Joes remain a nostalgic reminder of quick comfort food made with care. Peanut soup. Peanut soup, rooted in African American and Southern traditions, was a rich, comforting working-class dish made from peanut butter, broth, onions, and spices. Slow simmered to a creamy, flavorful consistency, it offered a hearty, protein-packed meal that was both affordable and satisfying. This soup showcased how simple pantry staples could be transformed into something deeply nourishing and soulful, carrying generations of history and resilience in every warm, nutty spoonful. Oatmeal with brown sugar and cinnamon. Oatmeal with brown sugar and cinnamon was a simple, warming breakfast staple in working-class homes. Slow-cooked oats provided hearty, filling fuel for long days, while brown sugar and cinnamon added just the right touch of sweetness and spice. Affordable and nourishing, this dish was a comforting way to start mornings, reminding families that even the humblest ingredients could bring warmth and sweetness to life's toughest moments. Cheese and crackers. Cheese and crackers made an easy, affordable snack, simple, satisfying, and perfect for working-class families on the go. Goulash, American style. Goulash combined ground beef, macaroni, and tomato sauce into a quick, filling casserole. Budget-friendly and family-approved comfort food. Sloppy Joe Shepherd's Pie. Sloppy Joe Shepherd's Pie was the ultimate comfort mashup, blending the messy, tangy goodness of Sloppy Joe's with the cozy warmth of a shepherd's pie. Ground beef simmered in tomato sauce, onions, and spices formed a rich, sloppy base, topped with creamy mashed potatoes spread thick and baked until golden. This hybrid dish stretched simple pantry staples into a filling meal that felt like a celebration on a budget. Perfect for busy families, it combined familiar flavors with hearty textures, proof that working-class cooks could innovate with whatever was on hand, turning leftovers and basics into something delightfully satisfying and utterly comforting. Red beans and rice. Red beans and rice is a beloved working-class classic rooted in Louisiana's Creole and Cajun traditions. This humble dish takes inexpensive dried red beans, slowly simmered with smoky sausage, onions, celery, and spices until soft and flavorful. The beans meld with their savory broth, thickened just right to coat every grain of fluffy white rice piled high on the plate. It was a Sunday staple for families who stretched a small pot of beans into a filling meal that fed many. Simple, soulful, and deeply comforting, red beans and rice stand as a testament to resourcefulness and community. Proof that with patience and a little seasoning, basic ingredients can transform into something truly special and sustaining. A dish of history, heart, and hearty flavor, all in one bowl. Chicken and rice casserole. Chicken and rice casserole baked simple ingredients into a creamy, comforting one-dish meal, perfect for stretching budgets and feeding families. Slaw dogs. Slaw dogs combined hot dogs with tangy coleslaw on a bun, a regional working-class favorite full of crunch and flavor. Bread and gravy. Bread and gravy poured thick, peppery gravy over stale bread. A humble, filling meal born from thrift and necessity. Cabbage roll casserole. Cabbage roll casserole layered cabbage, ground beef, rice, and tomato sauce. An easier, hearty take on a classic working-class favorite. Celebrate resilience. Cook, share, and savor these timeless working-class recipes.